Hello everyone and welcome to the first webinar organized by MRO Business Today on the impact of COVID-19 on aerospace MRO industry. As of now, we don't have to be a genius to really predict that the commercial airframe maintenance work is expected to take a significant hit as the carriers would be concentrating more on preserving the cash flow by either downgrading workloads or by asking to defer payments to MROs. With the possibility of up to 80% of the entire global fleet being eventually parked, a wave of maintenance order cancellations are anticipated across the industry. Many MROs are now focusing on maintaining airworthiness for temporary grounded aircrafts or for the fleets which are currently in action who are supplying the respirators, masks, test kits, etc. A ray of hope for some MROs is that there is a spike in storage requests for grounded aircrafts. Also, there is an increase in maintenance schedules from cargo carriers. With this as the opening comment, I would like to welcome all of my speakers on board. Andy Nixon, who's the co-founder and VP of Sales at MRO Insider. Hello, Andy. Welcome. Can you please unmute your yeah, perfect. Then
Well, thank you.
we have Mike Stengel, who's the Senior Associate at Aerodynamics Advisories. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
We have Penny Bonham, who's the VP Sales and Market Research at Nikon Laboratories. Hi, Penny. And finally, we have our own Eric Gonhart, who's the Senior VP Global Head of Aerospace at Pune Nagal. With this, I'll hand it over to you, Eric. You can take it ahead.
Thanks, Swati, and I'm very proud that you say our own Eric Goodhart because I feel a warm family member of the India aerospace community. And I'm really happy that you reached out to me to support this webinar in these challenging times. As most of the panel members already introduced themselves, we can do a little bit more later. But this seminar is now held on the day where information changes by the hour, where passengers will stay at a social distance as Delta last night announced that they will keep the middle seat free for the long term. This morning we were at 15,500 aircraft parked and 10,700 in operation. I just got an update just before this that it's again 500 less. So OEMs start to cancel orders. Leasing companies are questioned at liquidity. Airbus cuts the production yesterday to 1/3 for the long term. Lufthansa Technics announced that they will make 2 billion revenue instead of 3.5 this year. In short, did we ever experience this before? We have had 9/11, we have had SARS, but did we experience this ever before? And especially in this one, what does it mean for India? So I hope we can touch base on a lot of questions of the audience. The live questions first, and thereafter of course, questions which have been submitted already. So I look forward to exchanging, because the panel is not here to say how the world will look like, because then we would not be a panel now. We would do something else, because I think nobody has a crystal ball at the moment. So my name is Eric Goodhart. I'm used to work in the aerospace industry since the early 90s. I started after a computer career, my career in aerospace with Fokker. And to be honest, I don't want to share the same outcome, but when Fokker went into suspension of payments and bankruptcy, we had to develop all kinds of scenarios, how to survive, how to take the viable part forward, make choices. And that whole atmosphere around feels the same now, with a different outcome, because the industry will keep growing. But I really look forward to the exchange. So again, if each of the panel members after myself now can do a short introduction, as well as, did you ever experience such a situation before? Andy, may I ask you first? No, sorry, ladies first.
I guess I'm the only lady left that hasn't gone. Yeah, my name is Penny Burnham. I am the VP of Sales and Market Research for Nikon Laboratories. We are a specialty coatings manufacturer, and we've been in the industry since the 1950s. Our products are well known for being able to resist skydraw and keep electrical systems safe, keep substrates safe. The company has been growing. Our leadership here, the leadership team has been very great, and they've been able to keep us growing and starting to plan some scaling up. We have some new products coming out. So, we were doing really well, and, we're just waiting to see what's going to happen with all of the changes once the recovery period starts.
Thank you. Did you experience this ever before? What was the most closest experience you have to what we are experiencing now?
Well, I haven't. I've been in aerospace for the last 5 years. So there hasn't been a lot in that time that's felt like this feels. I think that we are going to experience things like we've never experienced before, but I think there's also going to be opportunities in this, that come out of this tragedy. So I don't really know. I'm really curious to hear what everybody else has to say. And
thank you.
A lot of you have been in it for a long time.
Thanks a lot. Andy?
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm Andy Nixon. I'm the co-founder of MRO Insider, and we are basically an online platform that started a couple years ago for aircraft owners, operators, companies to connect with service providers such as NDT, accessories, components, engine maintenance, APU, things like that. And so fairly new to the Part 121 world. We have hired a couple people recently, actually, since this whole pandemic started, that are familiar with the 121 world and trying to get us into that market a little bit more. But our main focus has been on corporate aircraft. So, we typically assist about 1,000 unique tail numbers in the U.S., Part 135 and 91, and then over into Europe as well. So as far as have I ever seen anything like this? No. I was in college when 9/11 happened for aviation. So that was pretty interesting. And then I graduated and the economic downturn, the recession started, at which time I was not very serious yet in my career. So.
Thank you, Andy. Mike?
Hello, Mike Stengel here. I'm a senior associate at Aerodynamic Advisory. We're a boutique management consulting firm based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we focus exclusively on the aerospace industry for business strategy, market analysis, transaction advisory, those sorts of services. And we've done a lot of work across the aerospace ecosystem with OEMs, airlines, maintenance providers, and I would say this is the first major economic and or global crisis in my career. I was also in school during the global financial crisis and September 11th, but we've studied the past downturns pretty extensively, and I see elements of both September 11th and the global financial crisis in our current situation.
Thank you, Mike. In introducing myself, I was partially complete, I know, because I'm now working for Kuehne + Nagel since 9 years as global head of aerospace. And in the background here, you see our global headquarters in Switzerland, which is 1.3 kilometers from my home, but you cannot walk because it's steep up. The good thing is about today that everything is relative, because if you look at our headquarters here, sorry, I need to do it like this, you see that there's still a spring garden. The spring plants are heavily growing and not bothered by car pollution at the moment. So there's something good in it with Mother Earth. But this is the introduction of the team. I'm very happy that you are all participating. Maybe ask the participants for any question and to whom you like to address. The first one is always the most challenging.
Yeah, Eric, we have a question actually. The maximum fleet which is got parked all over the world and operators are going for preservative activities only, nothing much is beyond it. And in case of India, this is the ground reality. So I guess the attendee wants to find out what is the case with the rest of the world.
I don't know if anybody of the of the panel would like to comment first. Mike, Andy.
I can kick it off. Yeah, I mean, we've seen extensive groundings and parkings in North America and Europe, and I would say increasing in parts of Asia Pacific. Here in the US, Delta, I believe, is grounding 2/3 of its fleet, and along with its peers, the larger network airlines, Europe has also been hit pretty hard with parked aircraft. There's just been a lot of unprecedented demand drop for both domestic and international flights, and probably international flights probably being hit harder at this point with the travel restrictions in place.
Andy, Penelope, anything to add?
Well, you know, I obviously we're waiting to see how that affects, you know, the manufacturers down the line. We've been hearing the same news about the parked aircraft. I think I read something like 8,000 parked aircraft are grounded right now. And we're, you know, hearing that the only service are really just keeping the grounded aircraft airworthy until the recovery period starts to happen.
I see here a number of differences against 9/11 and against the SARS crisis, etc. First of all, if you see after 9/11, I'm not only talking about the now, but also the day after, yeah? So after 9/11, what you saw is despite a pretty high fuel price in the market, older aircraft came back into service, being refurbished, etc., because the cost of capital was so beneficial for older aircraft to continue keep back flying, that they got preference to get back into service. We did it with the Fokker fleet as well. I don't believe that will happen now, despite an all-time low fuel price, which might expect to go up because of Russia and Saudi reaching an agreement in the near future. What you see in the announcement from American United is 75, 76, 74s will not return into service and will be retired and parked out. The same might happen to the A380. The only question around the A380 is what's Emirates going to do as the major operator of it. But there's I just learned this morning from Singapore Airlines that the refurbish of their A380 is on track. So they expect to put them back into service because they already did a 700 million investment in it. So I think there will be a difference. I think the maintenance will go down because of that. Both preservation maintenance is not such a big activity, but getting them back into service is for newer aircraft relatively less maintenance than for older aircraft. And it's just going to happen that there will be, you see already massive aircraft parking in locations where they are more likely to be parted out than to return into service.
Yeah, all right. We have a question coming in for Andy. That the attendees wants to know that what will happen to the 737 MAX program now and the 777X programs. The SFEs supply chemical cleaning lines for engine cleaning, and the grounding of 737 MAX has impacted the GE GenX sales. This, coupled with the GE 9X, is not being certified. So what do we think the potential delay could be, and could either of the programs be scrapped?
Yeah, I unfortunately, I'm going to have to pass that on to somebody that is more familiar and versed in the airline side of things. I can't, I mean, I'm familiar with the 737, but somebody else that's more involved in the program for the engines would definitely be better to answer that.
Okay. Anybody else? I'm more than willing to respond to any topic, but if there's anybody else, then Mike, from your side, I'm sure there's analysis on that one, right?
Yeah, I mean, the 737 MAX, with the shutdown and the grounding, the production shutdown and the grounding, we didn't think it would return to service in September anyway. But with airlines in cash conservation mode, we see deferrals likely. And we didn't. Even when production restarted, we didn't think it would immediately return to the original 40 or 50 month rate production. So we think it was going to be pretty gradual. So we only projected a small number of Maxes being delivered this year before the COVID crisis. So we think there's some downside there for that being pushed out to 2021.
Yeah. Okay.
And on the 777X, I mean, wide bodies, like I said before, international travel is probably going to take the longest to recover out of this crisis. So I could see a fair degree of risk to the 777X program and other wide bodies.
Thank you. I don't know if everybody read it, but Avalon Leasing now canceled a number of orders for new aircraft, but especially part of that is 75 aircraft for the 737 MAX. I think, in my view, also the COVID is now being used to take a number of measures which were anyway about to be taken in fleet composition and fleet delivery timing, etc. But the 737 MAX was about to fly in May for test flight and being ramped up for production for 20% by the end of the year. I wonder on both, because there's now additional software issues which Boeing announced yesterday, software upgrades. But anyway, only the park fleet, I learned, will take until the end of next year after green light to be back flying again. Will the 737 MAX be an issue? No, not as an aircraft. I think it's a narrow body aircraft, one of the two main ones, so it will go one way or the other. The engines will, what you see now is with the cancellation of orders because of COVID and the slowdown in production for Airbus structurally and for Boeing, like closing Charleston, Everett and Renton, etc. because of COVID, it will not accelerate the delivery of aircraft. Airbus announced that they have out of the 165 deliveries planned for the 2 months or so, they have 80 on ground in around to the airport. And of course, that will not. I was on another podcast or so, and they said, in fact, theoretically, there's no need to deliver one new aircraft this year. And that's what you will see the upcoming weeks. If we look forward, every week we talk a different language than the week before because it goes so fast. But what you will see next is massive cancellations, airlines still going belly up, and deferrals of delivery where possible, etc. So we got a number of questions here, of which one, how will the industry respond to lockdown from a manufacturer, OEM, and the airlines? If I may start on that one. What we use in our scenarios is that there's now 60% of the fleets grounded. It's very much dependent on what US government is going to decide on domestic travel in the US. If that will be an additional limitation, it will go far way up. And we think if not, then it will end up with 70% of the global fleet grounded in the next few months and then catch up again as of September. However, never like the same. So we think 30% of the fleets will be back in operation by year end, and 60-70% by mid next year. And then it will stabilize into a new, what we all call now in COVID days, the new normal. But that's sharing the internal kitchen, how we calculate at the moment. So I would appreciate any additional comment from any of the other panel members.
Yeah, we're doing our own analysis as well on the longer term impact of COVID and where we think traffic and retirements will end at the end of the year. But there are a couple wild cards that still need to be clarified. And you mentioned one of them, Eric, is government support and the terms of that support, which if that will require airlines to continue flying either their partial schedule or full schedule in order to receive bailouts or government support. So that's one factor. And the other factor is to, I see kind of three kind of factors influencing the pace of the recovery out of COVID. And there's epidemiology behind it. There's the demand side impact of COVID, and then there's the politics. The epidemiology determines, how fast the virus runs its course in a particular region. The demand side impact asks the question of how hard will economies be hit and consumers who are buying tickets, and that will influence whether they will be able to travel again quickly after this crisis. And then there's the politics as well, which asks the question of how well governments act and how effectively they act, how well they cooperate globally, and how quickly they begin to lift travel restrictions. Some of that is out of the airline's hands.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you'll definitely see, you'll definitely see some of the regional stuff pick up. And like Mike said, I mean, right now around our hometown, there are airplanes flying over regional size planes that are doing the rural airports. So they're flying empty planes just to continue to get their government assistance and stuff. So it's pretty interesting, but I think you'll definitely see that start to scale up a little bit more before you see more of the international travel. So all the governments can get along and figure out what the best route forward is.
Okay, thank you. There's another question, Will, very interesting one, which I learn daily as well. Really learning by these kind of discussions. Will there be a shift in route structures from airlines? As in, will we see more direct or back to a more global hub and spoke? That's a question which I cannot spontaneously answer because I never dealt with the question, but it's a very interesting one. Penelope, Mike, Andy?
So yeah, my take would be, this kind of gets to the demand side impact that I was just mentioned, but one scenario could be, on the other side of this, once the virus has run its course, if we are in a pretty deep recession, then that can make a lot of thinner routes less justified. And in fact, we've already seen some airlines, at least in the US, already announced that they're canceling transatlantic routes to so-called thinner routes, like let's say Philadelphia to Scotland or some smaller European cities. Yeah. Those flights may not have the necessary demand anymore. And we're looking into whether regional flying will either be cut or will actually help the recovery. You could say that if there's lower demand on the other side of this, then there could be more regional jets flying. But on the other side of that, they're flying to a lot of smaller cities. I think of my hometown as one example, from Detroit to Allentown, and that's a 1 hour flight with a 50-seat aircraft, and routes like that, if they'll stick around after this or not, is a question.
Okay, Penelope, you were about to say something. At least I saw you on the screen.
Yeah, I've just been reading about what's been happening on the MRO side. Just through like Aviation Week and a number of other publications. So I did read something about the business jet demand picking up in all of this because they can charter business flights, and you have less contact with people during this time. So I don't know about the routes particularly, but it is for us as a manufacturer of a product, it is quite interesting to be able to keep track of what's going on and just see the changes day to day that are happening. So I'm just keeping my eye open to see what changes are coming about every day as we come through this.
Well, let me make quite a little bit of a disruptive comment as well. If you see in Europe, there's a lot shaking on the fleet composition at the moment. I mean, Air Baltic announced that they will not fly anymore when they come back anyway smaller. They will not fly anymore with the Q400 and with the 737 current gen or next gen, but they will fly a one A220 fleet. Here in Switzerland, Swiss International Airlines and Lufthansa Group announced yesterday a big fleet reduction for definite, 32 aircraft or so. But Swiss is really looking to what extent they can use the A220 now for the European network. That was a statement without limitation. So for sure there will be A320s, but I think the E-jets of Embraer and the A220 series, the C series from Bombardier, will take a serious play in the game in Europe in routes. In the US, it's more difficult because pilot scope clauses, but it's still, Delta is also starting with, still doable. And if we now turn to India, if I may, Swati, India is, of course, by IATA anyway predicted in 20 years' time to become in the top 3 passenger traveling countries in the world after the US and China. So we will not, as human beings, we will not stop moving around. It might hesitate a little bit, but it will come back. So there's a huge, India has how many hundreds of airports in development as well. So there's a huge potential for prop jets and also regional jets and also other aircraft as we saw it develop. And when we were the last symposium in India, I really hope that the government of India continues with the plans to open up, if I may say so, because where the fleets will be growing, the business around it, I saw a request, comment from the DGM of Air India Engineering, and we know Airworks, etc. A lot. There's in my view, and that's not because this is an India MRO organized seminar, if India continues and accelerates the way of opening up from a legislation perspective to make things happen, there can be a fantastic future for India aerospace sector, which is already heavily developing.
True, in a way it is, but now after this COVID scare, let's see how things pan up for India, because our government is now really taking steps to, encourage the MROs in the industry. So let's see. Since this is not an India centric, let's take up. We have a lot of questions coming up, so I think we'll just address.
One of the next questions is, what would be the second wave impact like in case of Singapore impact of the present crisis on the leisure travel and international travel? I don't know what this the Singapore impact meaning, but I'm sure you read that Changi Airport closes, Singapore Airport closes Terminal 2 for 18 months, 18. So Harm, you have a question, why will this last longer? Let's come, Harm Lanser from Air France KLM. Let's come back to that later. But what will that mean on leisure travel and international travel? And that's perhaps not only Singapore, but what do you think? And we are all travelers as well, but we also know the statistics. Will there be a fundamental change in leisure travel and business travel?
I think international travel is probably going to be the most impacted out of all this. So Singapore, I think what he was referring to was they just in the past week saw a second wave of cases. So I think they may have been all imported, but that's one thing we had hypothesized about is what happens if, that's part of the challenge of this is you can't just lift the curtain all at once. It has to be done in a very orderly fashion in order to prevent a second wave of cases. And I believe all like China's cases right now are imported as well. And Japan is taking measures to limit the travel to the country by foreigners and non-citizens. So those are some of the government restrictions that are kind of in place and will take some time to gradually lift. And that's to me that's a challenge that we haven't seen in prior crises. And with that, in addition to that, there's kind of the fear element that we saw after September 11th, the fear of traveling, at least for the months after the attacks. But from the global financial crisis, there are also elements of the economic impact and the hit to consumers. Okay. So in a way, it's taking from both examples.
Okay. So Penelope, I saw you and perhaps Mike respond to the other question of Harman Lanser, AF KLM. By the way, he's Dutch, so he has a little bit of preference for me. not too much. I'm Dutch as well. But we are long-term related in this business. So he asked, why do you think the effect of COVID-19 will last so much longer as in 9/11, SARS, and the volcano in Iceland eruption? Period of crisis is much longer, but why would it take so much longer to recover at the end, as being predicted all over now? Andy, perhaps you?
Well, I think that, like Mike said, and a couple of the other people, it's just going to take more of the trust that the virus isn't going around. And 9/11 was just centered. I mean, it was fear for us here, I guess, and kind of threw us off our game. But with the COVID, you just you don't know where it is. You don't know where the second wave could start. There's just so much more uncertainty in my viewpoint. In order to get every single country back on the same page and getting the same feeling about it and the trust before you'll see it recover.
Yeah, I think it's going to take it's going to be a balance. People are going to want to recover financially and get back to work and get back to flying. But at the same time, we don't want to see this start all over again and then have to, have travel bans and so on way down the line. Once we think we're in that recovery stage, it's going to be a big balance on how we go forward.
I think that there's Harman and others. There's a big difference. You can differentiate it from two ways. One is, and I don't want to be disrespectful to any of the events because all events were terrible. Yeah, but if you look at 9/11 and the Iceland, it was quite consolidated. It's around one city, one country. And it was terrible because the impact was huge. But if it's for many people so quote unquote far away, it recovers faster. If you compare it with Iceland volcano, that has nothing to do with us as individuals. That was a nature eruption which caused flights to be cancelled. SARS came closer, but not all over the world like COVID now. I think we are now, who did talk in those periods about the new normal at 1.5 meter distance from each other, and not just now. Which airline did talk about having the middle seat free? And I think that's only the start, because I think even in 2 rows they will reconsider how the pitch will be, etc., in order to encourage travel. If you look at the number of aircraft which has been impacted, I read on Serum this morning that, sorry, Mike, perhaps Andy, perhaps competition, or Mike competition, I don't know. But I read that the fleets are back at the 1997 level. That's 20 more. That's how many years ago? 23. And only Asia has more aircraft because of the Asia development, not because it's, if you would compare it against last year. So the whole world landscape changed and the whole world landscape is different. And then if we come to a passenger, if you are a leisure passenger, you would hesitate to step into a full train or into a full aircraft. You would also perhaps hesitate to spend money in these insecure days until you have more clarity. And I think the business traveler landscape is not going to return like ever before, for 3 reasons. The same. Business travel will be restricted because companies need every dollar of cash. And that's not just now because the government is now supporting, but also in the long run. So we expect business travel to be very modest, at least until the end of this year, the earliest. Then these kind of meetings like Zoom have taken, video calls, I don't want to publicize Zoom, but have taken a structural place. I have never had so intense discussions with customers over another medium than face-to-face meetings. And it can be done. If we need to get used to it, it can be done. And the third one is, of course, also me as a business traveler. I would consolidate more travel to the US into 1 week than to fly into the US for 1 or 2 meetings and back the other day. That will not happen again either. So I think that it will be a structural change of landscape in leisure and business travel.
I agree, especially on the leisure side. If there's here in the U.S. you have the state restrictions, and beaches are closed in a lot of the warmer states, so there isn't really the need to travel to those locations either. And you know, if you have any portfolio holdings, your portfolio probably fell by around 30% over the last few weeks. So I think everyone's getting a lot more conservative about discretionary spending, and you know, across the board at both the leisure and business level.
Thank you. We got a very nice comment from one of the attendees saying there might be bright side to this with more legroom in the cabin when we recover and return. Yes, it's more comfortable, but in the end, the operating cost of an aircraft will not change. So if you would say that if that comes up at a higher price, would you be happy as well? Because theoretically that would be the case if an aircraft flies at 50% load factor, needing especially for low-cost carriers, they need 80-90% load factor. So if they operate at 50% load factor, it can only be that the ticket price is increasing as well. But yes, it's really, really interesting. Another question is, it's going very. What's the thoughts about the impact and even rethinking of business models? Like, for example, will there be power by the hour agreements moving forward? If I may elaborate a little bit, if airlines are paying a power by the hour agreement or an engine power by the hour agreement, in every contract there's a minimum number of flight hours which they need to pay anyway, or engine flight cycles. However, airlines are not paying that at the moment. We work closely with Rolls-Royce, so 53% is out of the aftermarket. The airlines just don't pay the base number of flight hours. Will there be a structural change of business models in your views? And please, Andy, Penelope, Mike, I think from all perspectives, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, sure. I think that, oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, please go ahead.
I'd say, you know, from the corporate aviation side, where I'm familiar with, it's hard to find really any of the aircraft that are not on some sort of maintenance program, either a JSSI tip to tail or a MSP or Rolls-Royce corporate care that they use. So it's, I think that it's funny. I think that in some respects, they will look at it now as a company, as a corporate side, and say, okay, how much is this flight department costing us for this travel? And they'll add up things like the power by the hour, which I've never been a huge fan of, because I think that, you know, that's kind of how our platform was developed. If we can allow people to go out and find the resources, and they just, you know, use a little bit of legwork to trim their costs and to find, you know, who can do this work, and, you know, I don't need it all bundled up into one thing, that ends up saving them quite a bit of money, you know, sometimes 20-30%, because of they're eliminating things out of the mix that they don't need to pay for. So from the corporate side, you know, I could see it going both ways, but I would say that people probably start to drop some of that power by the hour to save money.
Mike?
Yeah, from the airlines, power by hour agreements have been incredibly popular on both engines and components. You know, to the airlines, obviously they can, the rate they pay and the cash they pay is correlated to flight hours. And so now, even with the minimums, they should be seeing substantially less payments. But, you know, I wonder, I think the chances that there are big changes in the business model are pretty slim, because the alternative for airlines, if they don't do power by the hour, is either to do the maintenance themselves or to go more to a time and material approach. Both those approaches require a lot more engineering resources to manage either the multiple time and material contracts or significant investments into internal capabilities, which a lot of airlines have largely moved away from. And, you know, the growing share of the fleet is under low-cost carriers, and, you know, having significant or broad engineering capabilities and in-house wrench turning is not part of their business model.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question, retired aircraft, quote unquote, on retired aircraft. American Airlines are retiring all of their 76 and 75 aircraft sooner than planned. What do you think will be the aircraft to replace them, and how will this affect MRO and maintenance? By the way, United said the same on those fleets.
Yeah, American is retiring their 757s, 767s, and they just announced as well their A330-300s.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there will be probably a little bit of down gauging. So, American can replace their 767s and A330 routes with the 787s that they have and are taking more deliveries of. For the 757, there's the A321neo LR that can be a replacement. Both, I believe, well, United has ordered that. I'm not sure about American, but I know they have a bunch of A320 neos on order anyway. So there could be some down gauging in the aircraft size to the A320 or 737. And Americans also retiring, I think, close to 80 of their older 737 NGs that were 2000 vintage aircraft that they expect to be replaced by the 737 MAX once that gets recertified. But certainly the approach we've seen so far of airlines has been to retire their oldest aircraft first. So that, the 767, 757, A380 are going to be early victims out of this.
Okay. Penny, Penelope, any comment from you?
Yeah, I could speak from the supplier side, which is that we supply to both Airbus and Boeing. Orders are still going out. They are still asking technical questions of us about the coatings. So, we're hopeful that we're going to see orders continue. And it does look like those platforms are being talked about the most on our end.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Each of the airlines would be reducing flying hours per aircraft. This would mean less maintenance requirement and reduced revenue for MROs. Also, MROs would face additional competition, forcing them to reduce prices. Some airlines may also default on MRO bills. How do MROs recover from this scenario? And I like to extend this topic a little bit to other questions. And one fact is that the complete MRO market of this year was expected to be 90 billion. And now it will be not more than 53. That's a given. That's a fact. So, and I was talking to the CEO of HECO. Also, he said it will be more than 40% down Lufthansa Technics. So, how would MROs recover from this scenario, revenue scenario? And is it? I added with another question: is there a difference for airline-related MROs, like Air India Engineering, who have MROs which have a captive fleet to support, or independent MROs? And what about, to extend it, and then we have the picture complete, will the OEMs still have that focus on the aftermarket now that they get different challenges? I think Boeing will have less attention for aftermarket than for getting the MAX flying, etc., etc. Penelope, you're still in the spotlight, so you're the first one to make a comment.
Okay. Yeah, I think that it's going to definitely take for the MROs or all of our companies that we've been planning and reinvesting and updating our infrastructure and so on. Those companies are likely to be the ones that will survive this time, and then the ones that have not reinvested in themselves, it might be a bit more difficult for them if they are associated with an airline or they are working with an airline. It depends on whether or not that airline survives this time. I just see so many different scenarios happening in the recovery. So it's going to be a while before we know, but I think that there will always be companies out there that will pick up or will be able to take advantage of some of the people who weren't able to make it.
Mike, do you see a difference between airline-related MROs and independent ones?
Just a slight difference. The airline-affiliated MROs have the advantage of, like you said, the captive fleets. So if, for example, there is an airline with a significant fleet that's grounded, perhaps they see an uptick in activity as the fleet starts to re-enter service with return of service checks and things like that. but in the long run, the advantage starts to erode, and the independents will start to recover alongside of them. And as far as what the broader MRO aftermarket suppliers do, it's interesting to think about. Just a few months ago, the outlook for the aftermarket was really strong. There was, if anything, a shortage of capacity, and really across the board in airframe maintenance, engine maintenance. There are supply chain bottlenecks and things like castings. That's all changed now. So I think depending on how the recovery goes and demand outlook, there could be consolidation. There could be, airframe MRO, for example, is an part of the industry that's historically had more supply than demand, and we may be returning to that kind of environment. So there could be acquisitions and consolidation, more holding companies, maybe some closures of facilities. It's maybe too early to say yet, but that's certainly on the table.
Okay. Andy, anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, I think from the corporate side, for sure, I think you're going to see some consolidation of the MROs, and I think that out of this whole thing, the silver lining for the aircraft owners and operators, especially the fleet operators, is that I don't think that it'll necessarily make MROs lose revenue. I just think that you're going to see them become more efficient. They're going to be looking for replacement parts outside of just the OEMs. And they're just going to have to run a little bit leaner and understand that there's more competition now, that, it doesn't just come down to the hourly rate, but I think that over time, for what we had predicted a couple of years ago, is you'll start to see that hourly rate creep down that they're charging, just because there is more of a level playing field, and, they really need to figure out what differentiates them from the independent MROs versus an OEM and things like that. So that is what I would say on the corporate side.
I think to add what all of you say, and I see Harman commenting as well. I think the airline MROs will be heavier hit because they have that captive fleet which is parked now, and I think the independent MROs are should be relatively less dependent on the main customer, have more distributional split of revenue. So that's one, and the other one is that to whom did I talk yesterday? I don't know. Oh, I think it was an AAR podcast from the CEO of AAR. He said we have a pretty robust, and RTC yesterday as well, the new RTC. We have a pretty robust defense portfolio, which needs to keep going anyway. So depending on the balance between commercial and military or defense work in the portfolio, the risks can differ. But also here, the volumes will not be like it was before. Okay, we are close to, thanks really for the exciting interaction with one looking through at the camera and the other one looking at the right-hand side with all the questions. Perhaps one final comment from each of the panel members before we close up and hand over to Swati for the next steps, if any. Penelope, and one final comment from your side?
Well, obviously we're all wanting to be as optimistic as possible. I think that things will this will change the way that we do business in the future. I think a lot of us will be better prepared for if this is going to become a common thread. If viruses come back, if we experience times where we have to shut down, I think this is an opportunity to learn from what has happened here, being how enormous the problem has been, the issue has been this time, and then being able to prepare for this possible scenario in the future, and making our businesses stronger around it, preparing for just any downtime in the aerospace industry in the future. I think making stronger businesses, having more in savings, scaling your company in a way where you're more diversified through different areas, At the aerospace industry will really be a strong point for most companies, or a goal for most companies in the future. And I think that's definitely, we've been lucky because our leadership has, well, so far, I don't know what it's going to look like later, but so far our leadership has been planning the last couple of years to upscale, to scale up with new products and so on. And we've really diversified before and aftermarket, and even other industries as well. So I think we'll just do whatever we have to do to survive, and we'll look for the opportunities in all of this, uncertainty.
Okay. Before handing over to Mike, besides all the comments on the Zoom questions, also thanks a lot for all the encouraging comments via LinkedIn, which I get in now at least. So I'm really happy that it's serving a need. Mike, your final few minutes.
Sure.
Andy, yeah, now it's Mike. Mike is now in the spotlight, so go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. And, this will be everyone's saying this is an unprecedented time, and I can't emphasize that enough either. And, it will require a lot of people to hunker down and try and wait this out. If I were an airline, I wouldn't be spending really anything on MRO for this year, deferring as much as possible and conserving cash. So that's going to impact the supply chain pretty significantly. But, as Penny mentioned, there are opportunities to become leaner and more diversified on the other side of this. And, I think there is a strong opportunity for consolidation. And, on the airline fleets, we'll see which aircraft get weeded out first. The niche aircraft and older fleets will probably start to accelerate retirements. So maybe on the other side of this, silver lining maybe is that we'll have a younger, more environmentally friendly fleet. But obviously that presents challenges to the aftermarket since they're not as maintenance intensive. But again, opportunity for those suppliers to pivot to a new sort of a fleet demographic.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Andy?
Yeah, Swati, thanks for putting this together and inviting me. I appreciate it. From like Mike said, I think that you'll see the companies start to run more efficient, and they'll just demand. I mean, we're already seeing it now. We're lucky because we have a digital platform that we run, so we've already seen an uptick in people pushing requests through our site, so that it's just more transparency, and I think that people are just starting to expect it and demand that information more. So I just think that you'll see more of the companies, the MROs, as well as the flight departments, doing a little bit more homework and a little bit more research to keep themselves lean and, to work smarter, not harder. And it's also, I mean, if there's a silver lining for it as well for an MRO and some of these fleets, it's to step back and figure out, what their overhead look like and make sure that they don't ever get into a bad position again. And, we'll see going forward. But I think there's definitely some positives that'll come out of it.
Thank you. If I may do my closing before I hand over back to Swati. I thank everybody and that includes panel members, but also the audience, for the very, very intense interaction question, because that shows the need to collaborate, to look for new ways ahead. Again, we talk now this week, completely different, not completely, but significantly different than last week. Next week will be different again. The update to our board yesterday for me was longer and deeper. So we prepare for longer and deeper, so that in case of any tailwind we can benefit instead of getting an additional headwind like just Singapore mentioned. So we are prepared for that. On the day that our company also decided that we have 80,000 people, which is more important than paying dividend. So we have $1 billion in cash, but we still decided not to do dividend, which is approximately 400 million, just not to pay it at all, but not to pay it now in case of. So preparing for worse. I think we are at the start now, at a breaking point in the development of COVID as well. Looking back, it focused at the airlines parking aircraft, etc., etc. And this week we reached a turning point that is going to affect the total supply chain, and especially the inbound supply chain and the production lines itself, by announcements of order cancellations, deferrals, and by announcements of especially Airbus not saying because of COVID, but they will structurally reduce volumes and tempi of aircraft, looking at the market demand. So next week again, we will talk different again. I leave it to Swati whether to organize these seminars. We do our updates every other week in communities, and we get more and more every other week, more and more attendees. But that's on the logistics side of the house, and that's my daily business in commercial terms. But it will change week by week. And Swati, thanks for initiating this with the MRO business. And up to you for the final.
So a few takeaways from what we all heard is like, true, it's a challenging time, but like Penny said, we have to be optimistic as possible. We have to be prepared for such scenarios in future. And above all, we are lucky to have a digital platform so that we can be in touch with the industry. We can be in touch with each other as and when we want. So thank you, all the participants. I can see like about over 100 participants have joined from across the world, and I'm very happy. I'm very thankful and very glad all of you came here. All of you did a very interactive and a very nice discussion. This was the first discussion, the first webinar that was being planned by MRO Business today. We have planned a series of these webinars across this period of COVID, and we will continue this over the years. So stay tuned. I'll keep everyone posted for the next webinars. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.